Hey everybody, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I am Dr. Kristen.
Welcome to our YouTube channel and our continuing and expanded coverage of Netflix's phenomenal smash international global success, Bridgerton.
How many more adjectives do you want to add there?
I was just trying to find one and then I just kept going. Had 2 pots of tea today, folks. I apologize for my enthusiasm. Bridgerton dropped on Christmas Day 2020 to end a very catastrophic year in many ways. And we are huge fans of it. What you should know about us, we are huge fans of the romance genre of books, which is what we are here to talk to you about today. Because what we have noticed in all of this fantastic online discourse about what Bridgerton does well and does not do well is not a lot of conversation about the fact that it was based on a series of books that came out of a very specific genre in literature. So, as we are speakers and educators, we are going to speak education at you about the romance genre, what it is, what it means, how it's impacting the Netflix show in good and bad ways, and what to expect going forward with the future seasons of Bridgerton. I have been reading romance novels since Dr. Kristen gave them to me about 4 years ago. We started with hockey romance because I'm an avid ice hockey fan, and she was correctly assuming that was a good entree point. I have also loved Regency and historical fiction for a very long time. I am the huge Austenite of our pair of various nerddoms and fandoms. And so I've always loved that. And, you know, Jane Austen is very much kind of a romance novel-ish. They all get happily ever afters. They're set in Regency times.
But they're significantly more about social satire than they are in any way, shape, or form about romance.
About romance and sex, which is a key part of a lot of romance fiction. So that was my entree point into it through Dr. Kristen, who is, I'm just going to say it, folks, an expert in romance literature. She is. She's got a whole hell of a lot of receipts to back that up. But I think it's a great opportunity for us to be some of the people in this space having a conversation about the book series, what it meant and what it's doing, because it seems to be to us, and we mean this with all the kindness in our heart, something that people are forgetting or not knowing or not researching after the fact. So, Bridgerton. Books by Julia Quinn. There's 8 books covering the 8 Bridgerton siblings. They started publishing early 2000s.
Yep. The Duke and I was published in 2000.
2000. So that's their timeline. There's been some prequels and some sequels after that deal with various family relations or friends. But that's the guts of this show is based on that 8-book series that deals with the romantic entanglements of the Bridgerton children named alphabetically A through G. So that is where we find ourselves. Dr. Kristen, what would you like to tell our fantastic subscribers? What do they need to know about romance to know Bridgerton?
You need to know that it is the second most popular genre in publishing, only behind mystery and thrillers. You need to know that it basically bankrolls most of the rest of publishing. It does.
It does.
The word that is frequently associated with romance in the United States is Harlequin. And when I say romance novels, I will bet most of my bank account that you are thinking of Fabio on the cover with hair like billowing behind him, somebody in a lady in a really dramatic gown.
Oh no, I'm trying to find like an example. Keep talking on my phone. I have
yes.
It's not as dramatic as some of the
other.
It's
not as dramatic, but like the shirt, like the shirtless feature, the shirtless dude is a big feature. A lot of Harlequin series. Harlequin was a very specific way that publishing happened and still does, and its UK equivalent is Mills and Boon, and they actually are the kind of same. So really briefly, you have those are called category romances.
Mm-hmm.
They are because literally they are published within categories. There is like Harlequin Presents, for instance, is really dramatic and very like, this is a lot where a lot of the racist stuff about sheiks and like those happen in presents. That's their line where everyone's a billionaire. All of those books are about 150 pages. They're pretty short. You used to be able, and you still can, but very, very popularly send away for a subscription, and like 6 new ones would show up at your house every month, and you could hide them from the rest of your family. And most of us who are in our 30s discovered romance through finding our mother's Harlequins in like the bottom of her closet or something like that.
Hey,
I've done a lot of research projects on how people came into romance and how they experience it. And one of the guiding features is that we found it from a mother, a grandmother, or a babysitter. Like you always find it from a mom, a grandmother, or a babysitter if you found it young. So they have suspense books. Now Harlequin publishes lots of things that are all Amish romance. They have, which is a separate category, a separate video to talk about the proliferation of Amish romance, which is a fascinating thing. They've got ones that are super, super sexy. They've got ones that are a little bit more chaste. They've got faith-based ones that aren't Amish. All of these kind of things. There's medical romance. That's a really big thing, especially Mills and Boon publishes a lot of so-and-so's a doctor and blah, 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 blah. So those are all very, very trope driven. And by trope, what we mean is the building blocks of how people tell stories. You actually cannot tell a story without a trope. Everything has tropes. Everything has tropes. Tropes are not negative. Tropes can become cliche if they're used too often. And usually your mileage may vary on your personal opinion about tropes or not. And if a trope is cliche or a trope is really good.
And tropes, for instance, perpetuate stereotypes as well, which can be positive or negative.
It can be positive or negative. Yeah. But a trope in suspense is a trope in horror is the virgin that gets sacrificed. A trope in suspense is the phone line getting cut. A trope in sci-fi is the ship breaking down. A trope in romance is that you absolutely hate this person, but you need to sleep with them immediately. That's called enemies to lovers, and that's a really, really big one.
Yeah, enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, main characters don't like each other. Huge trope.
Huge trope. And so within romance, there's also, within every genre, there's boundaries of assumption. So within sci-fi, you pick up a sci-fi book, here's what you know is going to happen. There's going to be a non-human race of some fashion. Perhaps everybody is non-humanoid. It's probably going to involve space. It's going to involve wires and science and fiction about science. And that's what sci-fi is going to mean. You pick up a fantasy, you're probably expecting dragons, some sort of sword play, maybe a chainmail kink you may have discovered. Who knows? But fantasy usually means something that exists out of technological time. It also usually means 4,000 words about feasts on a regular basis, but that's my own personal bias against fantasy.
I was about to say, Dr. Kristen's not a huge fan of George R. R. Martin's writing style, nor am I, to be blunt, but that was
I like making fun of their obsession with feasts. And then you've got like historical fiction. There are things you know are going to happen in historical fiction. When you pick up a romance novel, here are the things we guarantee you. The main story is going to be about 2 or more protagonists who are seeking to be in a relationship that ends satisfactorily at the end of the book.
Whoa.
So,
otherwise known as
the happily ever after or the happy
ever after. Or for now.
But happily ever after is what we're in the genre for.
Literally.
That's it. That's the guarantee. If you want to read a book about a woman who is discovering herself again, and she breaks up with a husband, and her divorce is about finding herself, that's great. That's called women's fiction, and there's lots and lots of great stuff of it, and that's not romance.
Nope.
You want to read a book about 3 sisters who all find their own happily ever afters? Great. Again, not a romance. That's women's fiction. The point of romance is it focuses on one relationship at a time of 2 or more people.
Yes. And thus we get the Bridgerton series, in which the focus of each of the 8 books is a relationship of the siblings in that clan. And I think that's one of the things that we really wanted to hammer home in this primer video, because we've seen a lot of chat about the Bridgerton clan members or other characters that are not given as much space in the first season. And to me, it seems like that's something that maybe people, if you aren't familiar with romance, you don't understand. Daphne and Simon were always going to be the focus of this season, and everybody else was always going to be a secondary character, because the goal of this season was to get them to that happily ever after. They've had some wiggle room to play with that, and we can talk a little bit about what they can do differently going forward with some of the other siblings. But this, out of the gate, book one, this was going to be the story that was told.
Additionally, epilogues and babies and epilogues are a really big thing in romance.
All the time.
I talked to somebody who was really shocked that we saw the birthing scene, and I realized I would have been angry if it wasn't in there, because this is a romance show.
Yeah. We always get the update.
Always get the update. You always have to make sure they're living happily ever after.
You always get the ampersand. And then.
Now, romance, the genre of my heart, has historically done a lot of things badly. It has perpetuated a lot of racist stereotypes. It has centered the white, heterosexual, cisgendered experience above all others. It has, just like everything, it's not been great. There have been a lot of times in which white authors have been pressed on the idea, Julia Quinn is one of them, pressed on the idea of including characters of color in their series, and they botched the answer by either being outright, actively, and aggressively racist, or ill-informed and misspoken.
Benevolently white about it.
In the last, I want to say 5 years, there's been a louder conversation about race and romance, and we are not the people to have this conversation. We will be linking to a whole host of resources, including about the dissolution of the RWA's award ceremony that happened last year, and you can read all up on that. It has a lot to do with race. RWA is the Romance Writers of America. It's the largest kind of group. There have been women of color writing romance for a long ass time. They have not ever been as celebrated as white romance writers. If you are somebody who loves historical fiction, hear me now, you need to get very well acquainted, and please do it immediately, with Alyssa Cole's series set in the American Civil War, and with all of the works of Piper Hughley, all of the works of Beverly Jenkins, and a whole host of other folks that we're going to put in the links as well. This is the same for non-cisgendered, non-heterosexual romances. There have been published same-sex romances forever, and they've been at a lot of very small presses that have been doing the Lord's work without any money on the side of things. Bold Strokes Books is one of them. Riptide is another. In the last couple of years, the more mainstream, the big five publishers and their romance imprints have begun to print same-sex and non-binary and transgender romances. There is an obscenely long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
There are some incredible ones. We tend to write male more than female, and I can talk extensively about sociologically why we do that. Mm-hmm. But there is some absolutely incredible, both in historical and contemporary and fantasy and steampunk, and pick a subgenre, same-sex stories are in there. We are not as good with non-binary representation. We are not as good with transgender representation. I am increasingly hopeful that as more and more cracks in the traditional publishing structure open, more of those voices come in. We have not been good about disability rep. We have not been good about body shape rep. We have not been good about neurodivergence. We have not, all of these things are changing. An absolutely incredible story, a book from a couple of years ago called The Kiss Quotient, stars a woman of color who is neurodivergent. Amazing story, one of my absolute favorites. So written by Helen Huang. These are all the ways that we're getting better.
Yeah.
When Julia Quinn wrote Bridgerton, we were terrible.
Yeah, we're just calling a spade a spade. And I think that's one of the things that's also important to recognize. And one of the thoughts that I've had subsequently as we continue these conversations is that people are, through no fault of their own, I think, watching Bridgerton and expecting it to behave like a regular television show.
Yeah,
it is not. It literally can't function like one. And so we wanted to explain to you why. And people are putting a whole host of 2020 expectations on stories that have not been updated since they were written in the early 2000s. So they were written in a very different time, especially within, as Dr. Kristen just so thoroughly explained, within romance publishing specifically. So I think it's really worth kind of hammering home those points about what makes romance different and what makes Bridgerton different than another historical period piece that you might be watching on a streaming service.
So hear us say that the casting of Simon, the Duke of Hastings, as a Black man is a really big deal. It brought a lot of some of the racists out of the woodwork in that one. It's a really, really big deal. There are things that Bridgerton does very, very well to update it to what if Julia Quinn wrote this right now, what it might look like.
Yeah.
They have a long way to go, and we've got a whole video about the problematic things that they did and the root things they didn't do that we'll link to below. Yep. What I do want to say really briefly before we kind of go wander off is that even though romance does terrible things, I still, in the core of my being, believe it is one of the most important art forms that we have, especially for women. It has, before anything else really was, it is a female-centric genre. We are expanding that to essentially mean love in all of its forms, but I just want to really, really briefly talk from a female-centric perspective, what it means to a lot of women who have been reading this and kind of it's books that constantly celebrate female pleasure, both emotionally and physically. It's books that center agency. It's books, I mean, for a long time, like rape fantasies and all that kind of other stuff. But since in the last recent years, consent is a really, really big deal. I interviewed many, many women who learned about that they had the power to say no in their marriage from romance novels. Mm-hmm. I have talked to women that discovered what a vibrator was from a romance novel. I have talked to women whose marriages were saved because they had their husband read a romance novel. The amount of introspection, agency, empathy that the characters go through. I don't care if you're a steampunk werewolf in the year 473 AD. I don't care. A lot of these hallmarks of the genre exist in no matter in what trappings they exist in. I think it's incredibly important. I love all the places it's going. There are whole sections of romance that are good for you, not for me, and I celebrate them. I love all the boundaries that we're pushing. I love all the ways that we're trying to show love as widely as we can. As problematic as Kindle Unlimited is, that's a huge reason why we can do it. And I'm so grateful for ebooks and for librarians that take risks on books with love, not between two white people. I'm grateful for all of this. We have a long way to go, but I still love a lot of what we are.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great place to wrap up this video, because I think even with all of our varied criticisms of what Bridgerton did and didn't do well or struggled with throughout this first season, like all the stuff that you've just introduced all has the potential to be explored in Bridgerton. And while you were talking, I was thinking, yes, it's really important for these publishing imprints and these authors to be breaking down those boundaries and pushing the bounds of romance to include all folks of shapes and sizes and colors and feelings. But wouldn't it be great if Bridgerton did that? Because I think it has a lot of power. It has a hell of a lot of power in how successful it's become this quickly. And so I think we could see a reverse where, like, if Bridgerton goes fully expansive going forward in its diverse explorations of human love, it could shatter some of these boundaries. It could really advance romance in a way that it hasn't been advanced, like, drastically ever. And so for both of us, that's really exciting. And so I think that's all I kind of have to say, but I think it's a great place to end, where it's like, y'all, we can do really cool things with this. Like, let's go do them.
I love it.
Yeah.
If you're interested in these kind of conversations, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the little bell so you're notified whenever we update. We talk about books specifically in our series called Abby Research Reads, and it may look like I talk about a lot of academic books, but I sneak some romance ones in there too.
You sneak a lot of ones in there, folks.
I talk a lot about YA romance these days because that's what I'm reading. I'm in the middle of, as we read this right now, this one called Darius the Great Deserves Better, which is about a fractional Persian boy discovering his sexuality, and I am loving it. So we'd love to talk. We celebrate love here at Abbey Research as a verb, as a thing that motivates and challenges and shapes the world. And God, do we love a happily ever after. So comment below if you're looking for book recs. Trust me, we've got them. And we would love to continue this conversation with you. Whenever we see you next is when we see you, and we'll be glad to. Bye.
Yeah.